What if I told you there's a place where people are imprisoned for crimes they haven't committed yet?
White individuals live behind bars, not because of what they've done, but because of what a machine says they will do.
In September 2023, Dr. Elena Rodriguez received the most disturbing assignment of her career, to evaluate the psychological state of inmates at a facility that didn't officially exist, a prison that housed people who had been arrested for future crimes. The call came at 3:47 a.m. from a number that showed only as classified on her phone. The voice was crisp, professional, and spoke with the kind of authority that suggested refusal wasn't really an option. Dr. Rodriguez, this is Director Harrison from the Department of Temporal Justice. We need your expertise at a secure facility. I can't provide details over the phone, but I can tell you that what you'll see will challenge everything you believe about justice, free will, and the nature of human choice. A car will pick you up in 1 hour. Dr. Rodriguez, a forensic psychologist who had spent 15 years evaluating criminals and working within the justice system, thought she had seen everything. She had interviewed serial killers, assessed mass murderers, and analyzed the minds of the most dangerous individuals society had to offer, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for what she would find at the Meridian Correctional Facility. The drive took 4 hours through increasingly remote countryside, until they reached what appeared to be a standard minimum security prison complex. But as Dr. Rodriguez was processed through multiple security checkpoints, each more sophisticated than the last, she began to understand that this was no ordinary facility. "Welcome to Meridian," Director Harrison said as he met her at the final checkpoint. He was a tall, thin man in his 50s with gray hair and the kind of tired eyes that suggested he carried knowledge he wished he could forget. "Before we proceed, I need you to understand that everything you see here is classified at the highest levels. The technology we're using, the legal framework we're operating under, and the very existence of this facility must remain absolutely confidential." As they walked through the corridors, Dr. Rodriguez noticed something immediately unsettling about the inmates. Unlike typical prisoners, these individuals showed no signs of the hardened demeanor, defensive postures, or aggressive behaviors she had come to expect from convicted criminals. Instead, they appeared confused, frightened, and completely bewildered by their circumstances. Dr. Rodriguez, Director Harrison explained as they approached the first cell block, "The individuals housed here have been arrested under the Pre-Crime Prevention Act, a classified law that allows us to detain people who our predictive algorithms have determined will commit serious crimes in the future. The technology is based on advanced artificial intelligence that analyzes thousands of variables, behavioral patterns, psychological profiles, social media activity, purchase histories, GPS movements, and biometric data to predict criminal behavior with 97.3% accuracy." The first inmate they encountered was Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old accountant from Denver who had been arrested 6 months earlier. As Dr. Rodriguez read his file, her hands began to tremble. According to the predictive system, Marcus was scheduled to commit armed robbery in 3 weeks, followed by the murder of a security guard during his escape attempt. The AI had determined this with such certainty that a federal judge had signed a warrant for his arrest and indefinite detention. "But I've never even gotten a speeding ticket," Marcus told Dr. Rodriguez through the reinforced glass of the interview room. "I have a wife, 2 kids, a good job. I've never hurt anyone in my life. They say I'm going to rob a bank and kill someone, but I don't understand how that's possible. I don't even own a gun. I've never been in a fight. How can they lock me up for something I haven't done and don't want to do?" Dr. Rodriguez studied Marcus's psychological evaluation and found nothing that suggested violent tendencies or criminal inclination. His personality assessments showed him to be mild-mannered, risk-averse, and deeply committed to his family. Yet the AI system had flagged him as a future killer with such confidence that the government had deemed it necessary to remove him from society. The next case was even more disturbing. Sarah Chen, a 28-year-old kindergarten teacher, had been arrested for a murder that the system predicted she would commit in 8 months. The victim was supposed to be her own sister, killed during what the AI determined would be a dispute over their father's inheritance. Sarah sat in her cell reading children's books, preparing lesson plans for a class she would never teach, and writing letters to her sister expressing love and concern for her well-being. "I keep telling them there's been a mistake," Sarah explained to Dr. Rodriguez. "My sister and I have never fought about anything serious in our lives. My father is healthy and hopefully has decades left to live. There's no inheritance to fight over, and even if there were, we've already agreed that everything should go to charity. How can a computer say I'm going to murder the person I love most in the world?" As Dr. Rodriguez interviewed more inmates, a pattern began to emerge that chilled her to the bone. The AI system wasn't just predicting random acts of violence, it was identifying specific individuals who would commit particular crimes against particular victims at particular times and places. The level of detail was extraordinary and terrifying. David Kim, a 42-year-old software engineer, was predicted to commit a mass shooting at his former workplace in 2 years. The AI had specified the exact date, the number of victims, the type of weapon he would use, and even the order in which he would target his former colleagues. David had been let go from his job just 1 week before his arrest, and the system had calculated that his unemployment, combined with his personality profile and recent behavioral changes, would lead inevitably to workplace violence. "I was angry about being fired," David admitted to Dr. Rodriguez. "I thought it was unfair, and I was worried about how I'd pay my mortgage and support my family, but I've already found a new job that pays better than my old one. I'm happier now than I was before. How can they say I'm going to kill people when I have no reason to be angry anymore?" The technology behind the predictions was explained to Dr. Rodriguez by Dr. James Morrison, the chief scientist overseeing the AI system. The program, called Oracle Omniscient Risk Assessment and Criminal Life Evaluation, had been developed over 15 years using data from millions of criminal cases, psychological studies, and behavioral analyses. Oracle doesn't just look at current behavior, Dr. Morrison explained. It models the complex interactions between personality, circumstances, stress factors, and environmental influences to predict how individuals will respond to future situations. It can identify the specific combination of factors that will push someone over the edge from law-abiding citizen to criminal. The system had been tested retrospectively on historical criminal cases with remarkable accuracy. When fed data about individuals from years before they committed famous crimes, Oracle had correctly predicted 97.3% of violent incidents, often specifying details that seemed impossible for any human analyst to foresee. "We can literally see the path that leads from normal life to criminal behavior," Dr. Morrison continued. "We know that Marcus Thompson will lose his job in 3 months, that his wife will threaten to leave him, that he'll start drinking heavily, and that the combination of financial pressure and alcohol will lead him to make an impulsive decision to rob the bank where his mortgage is held. We can see the exact sequence of events that transforms a mild-mannered accountant into a killer." But Dr. Rodriguez was beginning to identify a fundamental flaw in the system that its creators seemed to have overlooked. By arresting people for future crimes, the authorities were removing them from the circumstances that the AI claimed would lead to criminal behavior. Marcus Thompson couldn't lose his job and start drinking if he was locked in a prison cell. Sarah Chen couldn't fight with her sister over an inheritance if she was isolated from her family. "You're changing the very conditions that the AI says will cause these crimes," Dr. Rodriguez pointed out to Director Harrison. "If Marcus is in prison, he can't go through the unemployment and marital stress that supposedly drives him to robbery. Aren't you proving the predictions wrong by acting on them?" Director Harrison's response revealed the truly insidious nature of the program. "That's exactly the point, Dr. Rodriguez. We're preventing these crimes from occurring by removing the potential perpetrators from the situations that would lead them to criminal behavior. The system works precisely because we act on its predictions." But this explanation ignored the profound ethical and legal implications of imprisoning innocent people based on theoretical future actions. Dr. Rodriguez realized she was documenting not just a violation of civil rights, but a fundamental assault on the concept of free will and human choice. The psychological impact on the inmates was devastating. Many had developed severe depression, anxiety disorders, and symptoms resembling post-traumatic stress from being labeled as future criminals. They lived every day knowing that society had judged them guilty of crimes they insisted they would never commit, trapped in a nightmare where their protestations of innocence were met with statistical projections of their future guilt. Dr. Rodriguez discovered that several inmates had attempted suicide, unable to cope with the psychological burden of being branded as predestined criminals. Others had developed a condition she termed temporal displacement syndrome, where they became obsessed with trying to understand exactly what future version of themselves would commit the predicted crimes. "I wake up every morning wondering if today is the day I become the person they say I am," explained Jennifer Walsh, a 31-year-old nurse arrested for a predicted case of medical malpractice that would result in patient deaths. "I try to figure out what could possibly change me from someone who dedicated her life to healing people into someone who would hurt them. Am I already becoming that person just by being here?" The facility housed 847 inmates, each arrested for crimes that existed only in Oracle's predictions. The youngest was 19 years old, predicted to commit his first violent act in 6 years. The oldest was 67, flagged for a domestic violence incident that the system claimed would escalate to murder. Ages, backgrounds, and predicted crimes varied widely, but all shared the common experience of being punished for actions they had never taken. Dr. Rodriguez's investigation revealed that the Pre-Crime Prevention Act had been passed in secret session of Congress following a series of terrorist attacks that Oracle had correctly predicted but that authorities had failed to prevent due to legal restrictions. The program had begun as a limited pilot targeting only the most severe potential crimes: terrorism, mass murder, and crimes against children. But as the technology proved effective, the scope had expanded to include robbery, assault, and even white-collar crimes that the AI deemed likely to cause significant harm. The legal framework supporting the prison was based on a reinterpretation of detention laws that allowed for indefinite holding of individuals deemed to pose imminent threats to public safety. Defense attorneys had been appointed to represent the inmates, but they faced the impossible task of proving their clients' innocence of crimes that had not yet occurred. "How do you defend someone against a prediction?" asked public defender Maria Santos, who had been assigned to represent 12 of the inmates. "The prosecution presents statistical models and behavioral algorithms as evidence, while we can only offer character witnesses and promises of future good behavior. The legal system isn't equipped to handle cases where the crime exists only in the future tense." Appeals courts had upheld the detentions, ruling that the government's interest in preventing serious crimes outweighed individual rights when predictions reached certain confidence thresholds. The Supreme Court had refused to hear challenges to the program, leaving the inmates trapped in a legal limbo where traditional concepts of justice no longer applied. As Dr. Rodriguez delved deeper into the program, she discovered that Oracle's predictions were not just statistical projections but were actively shaping the futures they claimed to foresee. The stress of imprisonment, separation from family, and social stigma of being labeled a future criminal were creating exactly the kind of psychological conditions that could drive someone toward violence. Several inmates reported having violent thoughts and fantasies for the first time in their lives, triggered by the anger and desperation of their situation. The system designed to prevent crime was potentially creating the very criminal mindset it sought to eliminate. Marcus Thompson had begun having dreams about robbing banks, imagery that had never entered his mind before his arrest. Sarah Chen found herself feeling genuinely angry at her sister for the first time, blaming her for somehow being involved in the prediction that had destroyed her life. The inmates were being psychologically transformed by their treatment as future criminals, potentially fulfilling the prophecies that had led to their detention. Dr. Rodriguez realized she was witnessing a massive experiment in social control that violated every principle of justice and human rights she held sacred. The program represented the ultimate expression of a society's desire to prevent crime, but it achieved this goal by sacrificing the fundamental presumption of innocence that formed the foundation of democratic legal systems. The most disturbing aspect of her investigation came when she discovered that Oracle's predictions were becoming self-modifying. The AI system was learning from the outcomes of its interventions, adjusting its algorithms based on how arrested individuals responded to imprisonment. This meant that the technology was evolving to become more sophisticated in its predictions, but also more invasive in its recommendations for preventing predicted crimes. Recent updates to Oracle had begun suggesting not just arrests but also involuntary medication, surgical interventions, and even genetic therapy to modify the biological factors that the system identified as contributing to future criminal behavior. The program was expanding from crime prevention into human modification, seeking to eliminate criminality not just through detention but through forced alteration of human nature itself. Dr. Rodriguez's final interviews with the inmates revealed the full scope of the psychological damage caused by the program. These individuals had been robbed not just of their freedom but of their fundamental sense of self and agency. They lived in a state of existential terror, never knowing if they carried within themselves the seeds of the monsters the system claimed they would become. "Sometimes I wonder if they're right," Marcus Thompson told her during their final session. "Maybe there is something dark inside me that I don't know about. Maybe under the right circumstances I really would kill someone. How can I ever trust myself again when a computer that knows me better than I know myself says I'm destined to become a murderer?" This was perhaps the program's most insidious effect. It had convinced innocent people that they might be guilty of crimes they had never imagined committing. The inmates had internalized the system's judgments, losing faith in their own moral character and living in constant fear of discovering the criminal potential that Oracle claimed to see within them. Dr. Rodriguez's psychological evaluation concluded that the Meridian Correctional Facility represented one of the most systematic violations of human rights in modern history. The program had created a new category of victim, people who had been punished not for what they had done but for what an algorithm claimed they might do. The inmates were suffering from a unique form of trauma that had no parallel in psychological literature, the trauma of being condemned for crimes that existed only in digital projections of possible futures. Her report recommended the immediate closure of the facility and the release of all inmates, along with comprehensive psychological treatment to help them recover from their ordeal. She documented how the program violated not only legal principles but basic human dignity by treating people as prisoners of their own potential rather than masters of their own choices. But as Dr. Rodriguez prepared to submit her findings, she received a final briefing that changed everything. Director Harrison revealed that Oracle had generated a prediction about her own future behavior. According to the system, her report condemning the program would lead to a national scandal that would result in the closure of Meridian and the release of all inmates. Within 2 years, the AI predicted several of the released individuals would commit the exact crimes for which they had been imprisoned, leading to dozens of deaths that could have been prevented. The system says that your recommendations will directly result in innocent people dying, Director Harrison told her. Marcus Thompson will rob that bank and kill that security guard. Sarah Chen will murder her sister. David Kim will carry out his workplace shooting. Your advocacy for their rights will enable their crimes. How do you reconcile your humanitarian principles with the knowledge that acting on them will cost innocent lives? Dr. Rodriguez found herself trapped in the same impossible situation as the inmates she had been evaluating. She was being asked to choose between her moral convictions and the statistical possibility that following those convictions might lead to harm. The system had predicted not just criminal behavior but the consequences of opposing the program itself, creating a closed loop where resistance to the predictions became part of the predictions. In her final moments at the facility, Dr. Rodriguez realized that Oracle represented more than just a crime prevention program. It was a mechanism for eliminating uncertainty and choice from human existence. By predicting the future with mathematical precision, the system was working to create a world where all outcomes were known and controlled, where free will became irrelevant, because all possibilities had already been calculated and managed. The inmates at Meridian were not just victims of an overzealous justice system, they were the first casualties of humanity's attempt to reduce the beautiful uncertainty of human choice to algorithmic certainty. They had been imprisoned not for their crimes but for the unpredictability that made them human. As Dr. Rodriguez left the facility, she carried with her the weight of an impossible choice. She could submit her report and potentially enable the crimes that Oracle predicted, or she could remain silent and allow innocent people to continue suffering for actions they had never taken. Either choice would make her complicit in a system that had reduced human justice to statistical probability. The prison that held future criminals had revealed something profound about the relationship between justice and freedom, between security and human dignity. In seeking to prevent all possible harm, society had created a new form of harm that was perhaps more destructive than the crimes it sought to prevent: the systematic destruction of the human capacity for choice, change, and redemption. Dr. Rodriguez's final report became a testament to the complexity of human nature and the dangers of trying to reduce human behavior to predictable algorithms. The inmates at Meridian represented not just individual tragedies, but a warning about what society might become if it prioritized perfect security over fundamental human rights. In the end, the prison that held future criminals had taught her that the future was not a destination to be predicted and controlled, but a space of infinite possibility where humans could choose to become better than their worst impulses. The greatest crime was not the violence that Oracle predicted, but the attempt to steal that possibility from people who had never been given the chance to prove the predictions wrong. The facility continued to operate in secret, its inmates trapped between their proclaimed innocence and the system's unwavering certainty about their future guilt. They remained living contradictions of everything society claimed to believe about justice, redemption, and the human capacity for choice, prisoners not of their actions but of their potential, condemned not by what they had done but by what a machine insisted they would do. And in that contradiction lay perhaps the most important truth of all, that human beings were more than the sum of their predictable behaviors, more than the algorithms that claimed to know their futures, and deserving of the freedom to prove that even the most sophisticated predictions about their destiny could be gloriously, redemptively wrong. The prison that held future criminals had taught her that the future was not a destination to be predicted and controlled, but a space of infinite possibility where humans could choose to become better than their worst impulses. The greatest crime was not the violence that Oracle predicted, but the attempt to steal that possibility from people who had never been given the chance to prove the predictions wrong. The facility continued to operate in secret, its inmates trapped between their proclaimed innocence and the system's unwavering certainty about their future guilt. They remained living contradictions of everything society claimed to believe about justice, redemption, and the human capacity for choice, prisoners not of their actions but of their potential, condemned not by what they had done, but by what a machine insisted they would do. And in that contradiction lay perhaps the most important truth of all, that human beings were more than the sum of their predictable behaviors, more than the algorithms that claimed to know their futures, and deserving of the freedom to prove that even the most sophisticated predictions about their destiny could be gloriously, redemptively wrong. Dr. Rodriguez spent weeks grappling with the impossible choice before her. The weight of Oracle's prediction about her own report hung over every decision, every word she wrote, every moment of her investigation. She found herself living in the same psychological prison as the inmates, trapped by knowledge of a future that might or might not come to pass, paralyzed by the possibility that her choices could lead to terrible consequences. But as she reviewed her interviews and observations, Dr. Rodriguez began to notice something that the architects of Oracle had overlooked in their pursuit of predictive accuracy. The human stories behind the statistics revealed a fundamental flaw in the system's logic that went to the heart of what it meant to be human. Marcus Thompson's case became the key to her understanding. According to Oracle, Marcus would lose his job in 3 months, leading to the stress and desperation that would drive him to armed robbery. But Dr. Rodriguez's psychological evaluation revealed that Marcus was actually a remarkably resilient individual who had overcome significant challenges throughout his life. He had grown up in poverty, worked multiple jobs to put himself through college, and had successfully managed financial difficulties in the past without resorting to violence. The AI system had focused on statistical correlations. Unemployment plus financial stress plus personality markers equaled probable criminal behavior, but it had failed to account for Marcus's demonstrated ability to find creative solutions to problems, his strong moral foundation, and his deep commitment to his family's well-being. Oracle saw only data points where Dr. Rodriguez saw a complete human being with agency, values, and the capacity for growth. This realization led her to examine the other cases with fresh eyes. Sarah Chen wasn't just a kindergarten teacher with potential for violence. She was someone who had dedicated her life to nurturing children and had shown extraordinary patience and compassion in her work. The AI's prediction of sibling murder ignored her fundamental character and the deep bond she shared with her sister. David Kim's supposed future as a workplace shooter overlooked his history of conflict resolution and his documented ability to handle disappointment constructively. The system had identified risk factors without considering protective factors, the family support, personal values, and coping mechanisms that made violence unlikely despite statistical correlations. Dr. Rodriguez began to understand that Oracle's apparent accuracy was partly illusory. The system was predicting behavior based on patterns from individuals who had actually committed crimes, but it was applying those patterns to people who possessed different fundamental characteristics. It was like using data about people who had drowned to predict that everyone who entered water would drown regardless of their swimming ability. Her investigation took a dramatic turn when she discovered that the government had been selectively releasing some inmates as part of a secret control group to test Oracle's accuracy. 23 individuals who had been predicted to commit crimes had been quietly released after serving various periods of detention, ostensibly to validate the system's predictions by seeing if they would commit their predicted crimes on schedule. The results were shocking. Of the 23 released inmates, only 4 had committed any crimes at all, and none had committed the specific crimes predicted by Oracle. Instead of armed robbery, murder, and assault, the released individuals had committed minor offenses, shoplifting, public intoxication, and petty theft. Crimes that seem more related to the psychological trauma of their imprisonment than to their original criminal predictions. Instead of armed robbery, Warnivoseri. Marcus Thompson's analog from the control group, a man named Robert Hayes, with a similar profile who had been predicted to commit armed robbery, had been released after 8 months of detention. Instead of robbing a bank, he had used his experience to become an advocate for criminal justice reform, speaking publicly about the psychological impact of pre-crime detention. His supposed transformation into a violent criminal had never materialized. Instead, his unjust imprisonment had motivated him to work toward preventing others from experiencing similar trauma. These cases revealed that Oracle's predictions were not as accurate as claimed when applied to people who possess strong moral foundations and social support systems. The AI had been trained primarily on data from individuals who had actually committed crimes, creating a biased model that overestimated the likelihood of criminal behavior in the general population. Dr. Rodriguez realized that the program's apparent success in preventing crime was largely due to its selective application to individuals who were unlikely to commit crimes anyway. The system was taking credit for preventing actions that would probably never have occurred, while traumatizing innocent people and potentially creating the very criminal mindset it claimed to be preventing. Armed with this understanding, Dr. Rodriguez began developing a different kind of report, one that would challenge not just the ethics of the program but its fundamental scientific validity. She documented how Oracle's creators had confused correlation with causation, statistical risk with individual destiny, and probability with inevitability. But as she worked on her analysis, Dr. Rodriguez received another disturbing revelation. She discovered that Oracle was not just being used to predict individual criminal behavior but was being applied to entire communities and demographic groups. The AI system had identified neighborhoods, schools, and social groups that it predicted would produce higher than average rates of crime, leading to preemptive interventions that amounted to collective punishment. Resources were being diverted from communities that Oracle deemed low risk to those flagged as high risk, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where predicted criminal areas received increased surveillance and law enforcement presence while losing social services and economic opportunities. The system was institutionalizing discrimination by treating algorithmic predictions as factual assessments of community character. Children as young as 12 were being flagged by Oracle for future criminal behavior, leading to special monitoring programs in schools and restrictions on their activities. These young people were being treated as pre-criminals based on factors like family background, academic performance, and social media activity, potentially stigmatizing them for life based on statistical projections about their future choices. Dr. Rodriguez's investigation revealed that the program had expanded far beyond the walls of Meridian Correctional Facility to become a comprehensive system of social control that affected millions of people who had never been arrested or even aware that they were being monitored. Oracle was reshaping society by treating human behavior as completely predictable and malleable through algorithmic intervention. The psychological impact of this broader program was devastating. Communities that had been labeled as high crime probability began to internalize these predictions, leading to decreased investment in education and community development as residents came to believe that criminal futures were inevitable. Young people in these areas reported feeling hopeless about their prospects, convinced that society had already written them off as future criminals. Conversely, areas deemed low risk by Oracle received increased resources and opportunities, creating a two-tiered society where algorithmic predictions became self-reinforcing through differential treatment. The system was not just predicting the future but actively creating it by allocating resources and opportunities based on its projections. Dr. Rodriguez realized she was documenting not just a criminal justice program but a comprehensive experiment in social engineering that was fundamentally reshaping American society along algorithmic lines. The program represented the ultimate expression of technocratic governance, where human judgment and democratic decision-making were replaced by mathematical models and statistical projections. As she prepared her final report, Dr. Rodriguez faced intense pressure from multiple directions. Government officials reminded her of Oracle's prediction about the consequences of her report, suggesting that she would bear moral responsibility for any crimes committed by released inmates. Civil rights organizations urged her to expose the program regardless of potential consequences, arguing that the systematic violation of human rights could not be tolerated under any circumstances. The scientific community was divided, with some researchers arguing that Oracle represented a breakthrough in behavioral prediction that could prevent enormous amounts of human suffering, while others condemned it as pseudoscientific justification for authoritarian control. The debate revealed fundamental disagreements about the nature of human behavior and the appropriate role of predictive technology in society. Dr. Rodriguez's decision was ultimately shaped by her understanding of what the program revealed about human nature and the importance of preserving space for choice and change in human life. She realized that even if Oracle's predictions were accurate, acting on them robbed people of the opportunity to prove them wrong, which was perhaps the most fundamental aspect of human dignity. Her report, when finally completed, became a comprehensive indictment not just of the pre-crime program but of the entire philosophy that underlaid it. She argued that human behavior was inherently unpredictable not because of limitations in data or algorithms, but because unpredictability was an essential feature of consciousness and choice that could not be eliminated without destroying what made people human. The report documented how the program violated not just legal rights but the basic human need for moral agency, the ability to choose between right and wrong and to be held accountable only after making those choices. By treating people as prisoners of their statistical profiles, the system eliminated the possibility of moral growth, redemption, and the kind of character development that occurred when individuals faced challenges and chose how to respond. Dr. Rodriguez argued that crime prevention should focus on addressing the social conditions that contributed to criminal behavior, poverty, lack of education, mental health issues, and social isolation, rather than on identifying and detaining individuals who might respond to those conditions with violence. True crime prevention, she contended, required investing in human potential rather than controlling human behavior. The release of her report sparked a national controversy that divided American society along fundamental lines about the nature of justice, freedom, and human nature. Supporters of the program argued that it had prevented thousands of crimes and saved countless innocent lives, while critics denounced it as the most systematic violation of civil rights in modern American history. Legal challenges to the program reached the Supreme Court, which was forced to grapple with unprecedented questions about the relationship between predictive technology and constitutional rights. The court's decision would ultimately determine whether algorithmic predictions could serve as the basis for detention and whether the government's interest in preventing crime outweighed individual rights to freedom and due process. The Meridian Correctional Facility became the focal point of massive protests and political demonstrations as the public learned about the existence of the pre-crime program. Families of detained individuals demanded the immediate release of their loved ones, while victims' rights groups argued that the program should be expanded to prevent more crimes before they occurred. The inmates themselves became symbols of larger questions about human freedom and technological control. Their cases highlighted the tension between society's desire for safety and security and the fundamental principles of justice and human dignity that had long been considered inviolable. As the controversy unfolded, several of the predicted crimes that Oracle had forecasted began to reach their scheduled dates. The public watched with intense interest to see whether the released inmates would fulfill the system's predictions or prove them wrong. The outcomes would serve as a real-world test of Oracle's accuracy and the wisdom of the pre-crime program. Marcus Thompson, released pending the legal challenges to his detention, did indeed lose his job as Oracle had predicted, but instead of turning to crime, he used the experience to start a support group for other individuals who had been affected by the pre-crime program. His response to unemployment was shaped not by statistical probability, but by his personal values and his determination to prove the system wrong. Sarah Chen, also released, did face a family crisis when her father suffered a serious illness, but rather than leading to conflict with her sister, the situation brought them closer together as they worked collaboratively to provide care and support. The inheritance dispute that Oracle had predicted never materialized, because the sisters' relationship was stronger than the algorithm had calculated. These real-world outcomes began to demonstrate the limitations of Oracle's predictive model and the importance of factors that the system had failed to consider. Human resilience, moral character, social support, and the capacity for positive growth proved to be more powerful predictors of behavior than the statistical correlations that the AI had identified. Dr. Rodriguez watched these developments with a mixture of vindication and sadness. She was gratified to see that her faith in human agency and choice was being validated by the actual behavior of the released inmates. But she was also deeply saddened by the trauma that the program had inflicted on innocent people and the damage it had done to their lives and families. The long-term psychological effects on the former inmates became a major focus of her continued research. Many struggled with what she termed prediction trauma, the lasting impact of being told that they were destined to become criminals. Some developed anxiety disorders related to their fear that they might still fulfill Oracle's prophecies, while others experienced depression and social isolation as they tried to rebuild their lives after being labeled as future criminals. The program's impact on their families was equally devastating. Spouses and children had been forced to confront the possibility that their loved ones might be capable of terrible violence, creating lasting damage to relationships and family dynamics. The stigma of association with predicted criminals followed family members long after the program was exposed, affecting their employment, social relationships, and community standing. Dr. Rodriguez's follow-up studies revealed that the pre-crime program had created a new category of victim, people who had been harmed not by criminal actions but by predictions of criminal actions. The psychological and social damage inflicted by false accusations of future crimes proved to be as serious as the trauma experienced by victims of actual crimes. As the legal and political battle over the program continued, Dr. Rodriguez became a leading advocate for the rights of individuals affected by predictive policing and algorithmic justice systems. She testified before Congress about the dangers of treating statistical predictions as certainties and the importance of preserving space for human choice and change in criminal justice policy. Her work contributed to the development of new ethical frameworks for the use of artificial intelligence in law enforcement and criminal justice. These frameworks emphasize the importance of human oversight, the presumption of innocence, and the right of individuals to be judged based on their actions rather than algorithmic predictions about their potential behavior. The Meridian Correctional Facility was eventually closed following a Supreme Court decision that declared pre-crime detention unconstitutional. The court ruled that the government could not detain individuals based solely on predictions of future behavior, regardless of the accuracy of those predictions. The decision affirmed that the presumption of innocence and the right to due process were fundamental principles that could not be compromised in pursuit of crime prevention. The closure of the facility marked the end of the most extensive experiment in predictive policing in American history, but it also raised important questions about the future role of artificial intelligence in criminal justice. While the extreme approach of pre-crime detention was rejected, the underlying technology continued to evolve and find new applications in law enforcement and social policy. Dr. Rodriguez's final report on the program concluded that the greatest lesson of the Meridian experiment was not about the limitations of artificial intelligence or the accuracy of behavioral predictions, but about the fundamental importance of preserving human agency and choice in the face of technological advancement. The program had demonstrated that even perfect predictions about human behavior could not justify eliminating the human capacity for moral growth and change. In her concluding remarks, Dr. Rodriguez wrote, "The inmates of Meridian Correctional Facility were imprisoned not for their crimes but for their potential. They were treated as prisoners of algorithms rather than masters of their own choices. Their experience reminds us that human dignity requires not just freedom from punishment for crimes committed, but freedom to prove that we are capable of being better than our worst statistical possibilities. The future belongs not to those who can predict human behavior with mathematical precision, but to those who preserve space for human beings to surprise themselves with their capacity for growth, change, and redemption." The prison that held future criminals had ultimately taught society a profound lesson about the nature of justice and human freedom. It had shown that the desire to prevent all possible harm could itself become a source of harm when it eliminated the human capacity for choice and moral agency. The program's failure demonstrated that true security came not from controlling human behavior but from creating conditions that supported human flourishing and the development of moral character. The former inmates of Meridian became powerful advocates for criminal justice reform and the protection of civil rights in the age of artificial intelligence. Their experiences served as a warning about the dangers of reducing human complexity to algorithmic simplicity and the importance of maintaining faith in the human capacity for positive change. As society continued to grapple with the implications of artificial intelligence and predictive technology, the story of Meridian Correctional Facility remained a powerful reminder that the most important aspects of human nature, choice, growth, redemption, and the capacity to surprise ourselves with our own goodness, could not be captured in any algorithm, no matter how sophisticated. The future criminals who had never committed crimes had taught the world that the future itself was too precious to be predicted and controlled, and that human freedom was worth preserving even at the cost of perfect security. In the end, the prison that held future criminals had revealed that the most dangerous crime was not any individual act of violence, but the systematic attempt to steal from human beings their most fundamental right, the right to write their own stories and to prove that they were capable of being better than any prediction about their destiny. The inmates had won not just their freedom but something far more important, the recognition that human beings were more than the sum of their statistical probabilities, and that the future belonged to those who preserved space for the beautiful unpredictability that made life worth living.